A woman, a blizzard, one wrong number that changed everything. Elena Voss had spent 8 months hunting the most dangerous trafficking network in the country. She had the names. She had the evidence. She had one final message to send before the storm swallowed her whole. But in the dark, with frozen fingers and a dying phone, she made a mistake that should have killed her, and instead sent her distress call straight to the most feared criminal in the city. He had every reason to let her die. He came anyway. And neither of them would ever be the same. If this story grips you from the first scene, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't slow down. The cabin door had been locked from the outside. That was the detail that kept surfacing through the static in Elena's mind as she crouched against the far wall, knees pulled to her chest, the wool blanket she'd found in the closet doing almost nothing against the cold that had settled into the floorboards like something alive. She had checked that door twice when she arrived. It had been open. She was sure of it. She had pushed it inward, felt the resistance of warped wood, stepped through into the smell of old ash and mildew. There had been no lock engaged. She had not locked it herself, so someone had locked it from outside after she entered. She didn't let herself sit with that for long. Sitting with it would mean panic, and panic burned calories she didn't have. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped to something she could feel in her molars. The single window faced northwest, and the storm was coming from the northwest, so the glass rattled in a sustained low note that had stopped sounding like weather an hour ago and started sounding like intention. Her phone showed 4% battery. No signal bars. She had tried 11 times over the past 2 hours, moving to every corner of the single room, holding the device at angles that made her shoulder ache. Once, for about 40 seconds, she had caught a fragment of something. Not enough for a call, not enough for data, but enough to cue a text message for transmission if a signal returned. She typed it fast. She typed it with the kind of focus that comes when your hands are so cold you can't feel your fingertips and you know the window is closing. Marcus. It's Elena. Mountain cabin off Route 9. Old Forestry Road, 4 miles past the Harwick Junction. I'm trapped. Storm's worse than forecast. Phone dying. I found what we needed. All of it. Names, accounts, transit routes. It's on the drive. If I don't make it out, you know what to do with it. Get someone up here or call Harwick County Sheriff. Hurry! She hit send. The message sat in the queue. Pending. The battery icon turned red. She didn't know she had mistyped the last digit of Marcus's number. She didn't know she had been typing in the near dark, or that her contact list had auto-suggested a name she didn't recognize, or that the number the message finally transmitted to, when the signal spiked briefly at 11:47 p.m., was not Marcus Hale, her editor's deputy at the Caldwell Tribune, but a burner number registered to a shell company she had never heard of, forwarded through 2 layers of routing to a phone currently sitting on the passenger seat of a black Range Rover parked outside a warehouse in the Eastwick district. She only knew the phone went dark a minute later, and the storm kept coming. Damon Varelli had been having a conversation he didn't particularly want to have. The man across from him, Theo, who ran receivables for the Western Corridor, and who had apparently decided that skimming 3% off the top for 6 months was something Damon would not eventually notice, was in the middle of an explanation that had already taken 12 minutes and showed no signs of concluding. Damon was listening. He always listened. That was something people misunderstood about him. They assumed the silence was inattention. It wasn't. It was arithmetic. He was calculating what this moment cost him. Not just the money, that was recoverable, but the precedent. The signal it sent if he handled it wrong. Too soft, and the next man with access would make the same calculation. Too hard, and he'd spend the next month managing a story he didn't need circulating. He had built this organization on the principle that predictability was more valuable than fear, and that a man who kept his word, in every direction, was harder to threaten than one who merely had a reputation for violence. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed. Theo was still talking. Damon glanced at the screen. Unknown number. The message icon sat there. He almost left it. He had a rule about unknown numbers on this phone. You didn't engage, you didn't acknowledge, you handed it to the tech team in the morning. But Theo had paused for breath, and the interior of the Range Rover had gone briefly quiet. and in that quiet, Damon picked up the phone and read the message without entirely meaning to. He read it twice. Then he said, "Hold on," to Theo, which meant stop talking, which Theo understood because the man was many things, but not entirely without survival instinct. Damon reread the message a third time. "It's Elena. Mountain cabin off Route 9. I'm trapped. Storm's worse than forecast. Phone dying." He didn't know any Elena. The number was completely unfamiliar. If I don't make it out, you know what to do with it. A wrong number, clearly. Someone who had meant to reach someone else and had found him instead. He should put the phone down. He had a meeting to finish, a problem to resolve, a city full of people who operated on the assumption that Damon Varelli's attention was a finite and consequential resource. "Get out of the car," he said to Theo. Theo blinked. "We're not—" "I'll call you tomorrow. Get out." The door closed. Damon sat in the dark interior and looked at the message again and did something that surprised him. He tried to reply. The message bounced back immediately. Number unreachable. He tried twice more. Same result. He sat there for a moment listening to sleet tick against the windshield, and then he opened the mapping application and searched Route 9 Harwick Junction. The nearest point was roughly 60 miles from where he was sitting. He sat with the information for what felt like a long time and was probably 20 seconds. Then he started the engine. Check. He didn't examine the decision. Examining it would have produced reasons not to act, and Damon had learned a long time ago that reasons not to act were the easiest things in the world to manufacture. He drove north out of Eastwick with the heater running full and the radio off, following the route northeast through terrain that got worse every 15 miles. The sleet had become snow somewhere past the county line, not the decorative kind, but the kind that moved sideways and erased the difference between road and shoulder. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set and didn't think about whether this made any sense. He thought about the message instead. "I found what we needed, all of it, names, accounts, transit routes, a journalist maybe, or law enforcement." The phrasing was specific in a way that suggested someone who trafficked in information professionally. "You know what to do with it." That was a sentence you said to someone you trusted absolutely, someone whose instinct you relied on even from a distance. Damon had not said something like that to anyone in over a decade. The forestry road was unmarked. He found it by a process of elimination, counting mileage from the junction and slowing to walking speed through 3 possible turnoffs before the headlights caught a reflective post half buried in a snowbank. He turned in. The road hadn't been maintained. The ruts were deep and frozen, and the Range Rover's suspension communicated its displeasure in sustained metallic protest as he climbed. The cabin appeared in his headlights at 1:23 a.m. It was smaller than he'd expected. One room, by the look of the exterior. Wood-sided, the roof heavily loaded with new snow, a single window on the north face glowing with what was probably a phone screen being held against the glass. A single light source. Faint. Nearly gone. He left the engine running and the headlights on and got out into the cold. It was the kind of cold that got inside your clothing in the first 3 seconds. He was wearing a good coat. He always wore a good coat, but it was not a coat designed for this. He pushed through shin-deep snow to the door, grabbed the handle, and found it locked. Not just closed, locked with a padlock he hadn't expected, newer than the cabin, the kind you bought at a hardware store when you wanted to secure something and weren't worried about aesthetics. He stood in front of it for a moment, snow collecting on his shoulders. Then he went back to the Range Rover, pulled the kit from beneath the rear seat, and came back with a bolt cutter. The padlock gave on the second attempt. He pushed the door open. The woman inside came off the floor swinging. She had something in her hand, a piece of firewood, he registered, short and dense, the kind of improvised weapon that would absolutely break your nose if it connected cleanly. And she swung it at the level where a man's head would be if he were shorter than Damon, which he wasn't. The wood passed close enough to displace air against his ear. He caught her wrist on the backswing without thinking, an automatic response, and she twisted against his grip with a ferocity that told him she'd been rehearsing this moment for hours. "Stop," he said. She didn't stop. She drove her elbow toward his face, which he deflected and then tried to bring her knee up, which he blocked by turning sideways, and they stood like that for a moment in the doorway, with cold pouring in behind him, and her breath coming in sharp, ragged pulls, her wrists still locked in his hand. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "Let go of me." I will. I'm going to let go. But I need you to hear that I got a message from this number tonight, and I drove up here because you said you were trapped, and the door was locked from the outside, okay? I'm not who you were trying to reach. I'm not a cop. But I'm not what locked that door either. A long pause. She was studying his face with the focused intensity of someone trying to read very fast in bad light. He could see her clearly now. Early 30s, dark hair frozen at the ends, a bruise along her left jaw that hadn't been made by the cold, and eyes that were exhausted and frightened and absolutely refusing to give either of those things any authority. She was shaking from the cold. She'd been here a long time. He felt her wrist go fractionally less rigid. "Who are you?" she said. "Someone who got your message." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not. But we need to close the door because you're already hypothermic and it's going to get worse standing here." She looked at him for another 3 seconds, he counted, then stepped back. He came in and pulled the door shut behind him. The silence of the cabin was a different quality from the silence outside. Thicker, compressed, smelling of ash and something floral and long decayed. She had arranged the space efficiently. The blanket was balled against the wall where she'd been crouching. The phone was on the floor near the window, dark. The piece of firewood she'd had in her hand was now by her side, not lowered, not put down. Still in play. "There's no fire," he said. "Flue's blocked. Tried it. Got smoke." "I have supplies in the truck." He met her eyes. "I'll get them. You can keep the wood if it makes you feel better." Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed her face. Wasn't quite anything. "Go ahead." He brought in the emergency bag. Thermal blankets, a small propane heat unit, water, food that was technically edible, and set it on the floor without ceremony. He got the propane unit running in 4 minutes. The heat it put out was modest but real, and he watched her orient toward it like a compass finding north, the shaking in her hands visibly easing over the next 10 minutes as she wrapped the thermal foil around her shoulders and held her palms over the element. He sat against the opposite wall, as far from her as the room allowed, and waited. She was the one who broke the silence. "You said you're not a cop." "That's right. And you drove 60 miles in a blizzard because a stranger texted you." "Approximately 60 miles, yes." "Why?" He thought about the honest answer and decided to give it, which was not something he did with most people. "I don't entirely know. The message said you were trapped and your phone was dying. The door being locked from the outside confirmed you weren't wrong about your situation. It seemed worth the drive." She pulled the foil tighter. "Who do you think I was trying to reach?" "Someone you trust." The message read like a handoff, in case you didn't make it. He paused. "Did you?" She looked at him steadily. "Did I what?" "Make it. Out. Whatever you meant by that." A long silence. The propane heater ticked. "I got what I came for," she finally said. "It's on a drive. I've still got it." She hesitated, and he could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. How much to say, how much exposure that created. What she could afford to tell a stranger whose name she still didn't know. "I'm a journalist. I've been working a story for 8 months. I drove up here to get something from someone who said they had documents. Evidence. Did they?" "They left it taped under a floorboard and didn't show up themselves." Her jaw tightened. "The door being locked from outside, but that wasn't coincidence." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." "So someone knows I'm here." "Yes." "And someone wanted to make sure I didn't leave." "That's the logical reading." She nodded slowly. The shaking had mostly stopped. Color was coming back to her face, slow and incremental, like watching a photograph develop. In better light, in a different context, she might have been described as striking. Right now, she looked like a person who had survived something and was still in the process of understanding what. "You still haven't told me your name," she said. Damon considered this. "Virelli," he said. Damon Virelli. He watched her face. She was a journalist. If the name meant anything to her, it would show. And it did. Not fear exactly, not immediately, but a rapid recalibration, the same expression someone makes when they realize a piece they placed one way on a board can be read entirely differently. She went very still. "You're real," she said. I wasn't sure if... She stopped. Started again. Damon Varelli is a name that comes up in crime reporting. Eastwick, the distribution network. She paused. The Varelli organization. Yes. You run it. I do. She stared at him for a long moment. The piece of firewood was still beside her. She had not relaxed her proximity to it. And you drove up here to rescue me. I drove up here because you sent a message to a number that ended up being mine, and the door was locked from the outside. And I have never in my life been able to sit across the room from a problem and pretend I can't see it. He said it flatly, without decoration, and he meant it. I don't know what story you're working, I don't know what's on your drive, and I am not your enemy tonight. Tonight. She caught the qualifier. He watched her catch it. Okay, she said at last. Okay. She exhaled something that might have been a breath she'd been holding since she woke up in this cold. My name is Elena Voss, and I need to get off this mountain. You need to get warm first, he said. Then we leave. Together? He looked at the blocked door, at the snow still battering the single window, at the propane heater throwing its small circle of warmth into the dark. The road down is 30 minutes in good conditions, he said. Tonight it's longer. You go alone, you go on foot, because you have no vehicle and your phone is dead. You go with me, you get to the bottom in one piece. And then you decide what happens next. I'll drive you wherever you need to go. Even though I just told you I'm a journalist who investigates organized crime. Yes. She searched his face again with that same fast-reading intensity. Why does that not seem to bother you? Damon reached into his coat pocket and held out a power bank, charged. Plug your phone in, he said. We leave in 20 minutes. She looked at the power bank for a moment, then took it. They didn't talk much on the way down. She sat in the passenger seat with her phone charging, watching the road emerge in the headlights, and he drove with careful, deliberate attention, feeling the rear tires break loose twice on the switchbacks and correcting both times without comment. The storm was easing. Not gone, but the worst of it had moved east, and by the time they reached the county road, the snow was falling at a rate that was merely severe rather than apocalyptic. At some point between the forestry road and the junction, her phone rebooted. He heard the startup tone, heard her exhale. Message went through, she said. Which message? The one I sent. It went to you, not... She stopped. I was trying to reach my colleague, Marcus Hale. He's the deputy editor. He knows the full story. She looked at the phone. I have 17 missed calls from him. Call him. I'm going to. She did, stepping partway out of her own sentence to make the connection, and Damon kept his eyes on the road and listened to what he could hear of her side of the conversation, which was not a full picture but was enough. I'm okay. I'm out. The documents are secure. A pause. No, someone else. I'll explain. Another pause, longer. Marcus, listen to me. The cabin was locked from the outside. Someone knew I was going up there. You need to think carefully about who you told. Her voice was level, but her hand on the phone had gone tight, knuckles pale in the dashboard light. Yes. Yes. I know. I know what that means. She hung up. 60 seconds of silence. Problem? Damon said. Elena looked out the side window at the snow-covered dark. He says he didn't tell anyone where I was going. Another pause. But someone did. The cabin door doesn't lock itself. She turned back. The story I've been working, it's a trafficking network. I've been building the case for 8 months. Source documents, financial trails, victim accounts. Everything was supposed to come together this week. He kept his expression level. That's a significant story. It's more than significant. It goes into corporate structures, law enforcement connections, city government. She paused. I've been careful. I've kept it tight. Only 3 people at the paper knew the full scope. 3 people, he said. 3 people. She said it like she was hearing the number differently now, like she had been holding it in her mind as a number and it was becoming something else. He didn't say anything. The county road opened up ahead of them, the surface better, the storm lighter, and he brought the speed up a little and let the silence expand. She broke it. "The network I've been tracking," she said slowly. "Some of the financial routing. There's a company called Eastbridge Partners. It's a shell, but it traces to Eastwick." She was watching him now, directly, not reading him anymore, but testing something. "You know Eastwick." "I live in Eastwick." "Does the name Eastbridge Partners mean anything to you?" Damon's hands stayed where they were on the wheel. His expression didn't change because he had spent 20 years learning to hold his face still when it mattered. But something moved through him that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, and was instead the particular cold sensation of two separate things clicking into alignment that should never have been in the same room. Eastbridge Partners. He knew the name. He had seen it in documents 3 years ago, buried in a chain of entities that had been traced backward from a seized shipment, a line of inquiry he had pursued privately, quietly, for reasons that had nothing to do with his current business and everything to do with a different time. He had stopped pursuing it because the chain had gone somewhere he wasn't prepared to follow. "Why do you ask?" he said. Elena Voss was watching him with the eyes of someone who had spent 8 months learning to read rooms. "Because your face just changed," she said quietly. "And I don't think you're the kind of man whose face changes often." Damon looked at the road ahead. The snow fell in the headlights, steady and indifferent, and somewhere behind them the mountain they'd come down was already disappearing into white. "Tell me about Eastbridge Partners," he said. And something in his voice, the particular flatness of a man who has arrived at a question he should have asked years ago, made Elena Voss turn fully in her seat to study him, because she was a journalist down to the marrow of her bones, and she knew the sound of a story changing shape in real time. "How much do you know about what happened 6 years ago?" she asked. "The Virelli family." The headlights caught the county road sign. 3 miles to the highway. He drove. He didn't answer. But his jaw had gone to iron, and the temperature inside the Range Rover seemed to drop by several degrees, and Elena Voss understood, with the slow-building certainty of someone watching dominoes align, that the wrong number she had sent from a dying phone on a frozen mountainside had not been a mistake at all. It had been the first true lead she'd had in 8 months, and the man driving her to safety was either the most dangerous thing she'd ever been near, or the only person in the world with a reason to help her finish what she'd started. She wasn't yet sure which. She kept the drive in her jacket pocket, her fingers pressed against it, and watched the snow fall, and waited to find out. They reached the highway at 2:40 a.m. The snow was still falling, but the wind had dropped, and the county road merged into 4 lanes of salted blacktop that felt almost civilized after the mountain. Damon drove south toward the city with the heater running and the radio off and the particular focused silence of a man who was thinking in several directions simultaneously and not showing any of it. Elena had her phone in her lap. She'd been scrolling since they hit signal, catching up on 17 missed calls and a chain of text messages that she was reading with the expression of someone who finds, upon opening a letter, that it contains different news than expected. Her jaw was set. Her breathing had evened out, but it was still controlled, still measured, the way you breathe when you're keeping something locked behind your sternum. He didn't ask. He drove. She was the one who spoke first. And when she did, her voice was quieter than it had been on the mountain, quieter and more careful. "Marcus sent someone to check my apartment." "When?" "An hour ago. He was worried when the calls didn't connect." She paused. "The lock on my door was forced. Whoever did it was looking for something. They went through my desk, my filing cabinet, left the electronics, which means it wasn't a burglary." "They were looking for what's on the drive." "Yes." She turned the phone face down on her knee, which means they knew the drive existed, which means someone inside my paper told them. Damon kept his eyes on the road. "You said 3 people knew the full scope of your investigation." "Yes." "Who are they?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell him she was making a decision about how much to give him. He understood the pause. He had spent his adult life making the same calculation with different people in different rooms. "Marcus Hale," she finally said. "My deputy editor. He's the one I was trying to reach tonight." Another breath. "Caleb Mercer, my direct editor. He assigned the story. He's managed my resources. He knows every significant lead I've developed. She stopped. That's two. Yes. The word came out flat, like she'd cut something off behind it. Who's the third? Elena looked out the window. The highway median lights flicked past in a steady rhythm. A source, inside the financial sector. He's been feeding me documents for 6 months. I don't use his name. Not even now. Especially not now. She turned back. If someone went through my apartment looking for a drive, then at least one of the 3 people who knew about the investigation told someone where to look. And until I know which one, I'm not giving you a name you could use. Damon glanced at her. Fair. She seemed mildly surprised by that. She had been expecting pushback, he could tell. Had been bracing for it, the slight forward set of her shoulders, the way she'd framed the refusal as a statement rather than a question. He had no interest in pushing back. She was being careful, and careful was the right response to her current situation. He would have been worried if she weren't. Where are you taking me? She said. Where do you want to go? Not my apartment. No, he agreed. Not your apartment. She exhaled slowly. I need to think. I need somewhere I can think without... She stopped, pressing her lips together. I've been running this investigation from my apartment, from the paper, from coffee shops and public libraries. Any of those places. If someone wanted to find me, they'd find me. I know a place, Damon said. She looked at him. It's not what you're imagining, he said. You don't know what I'm imagining. You're imagining something that ends badly for you, a building full of people who work for me, a situation where the leverage shifts. He said it plainly, the way you name a thing to drain it of its power. It's a private property, a house, not a facility. It's not in use right now, no staff. You'd have a bedroom, a working internet connection, and a door with a lock you control. Why would you offer me that? He was quiet for a moment. On the highway, a plow truck moved past in the oncoming lane, orange light sweeping across the interior of the Range Rover in a slow pulse. Because Eastbridge Partners is connected to what happened to my family 6 years ago, he said, and you know something about Eastbridge Partners. And whatever is on that drive may be the most significant piece of evidence I've been trying to locate for 3 years. The silence that followed was a different quality from the silences before it. It had weight. Your family, Elena said carefully. My sister. My mother. He said the words the way you say words you've rehearsed to make them carry less. They were killed. It was made to look like a traffic accident. It was not a traffic accident. I've known this since 8 months after it happened. I've never been able to prove it. He paused. The chain I traced led to Eastbridge Partners and then went dead. I didn't have the tools to follow it further. What I do is not investigative journalism. My tools are different. Elena had gone very still. What year? 6 years ago, February. She opened her phone again, pulled up something, scrolled. He heard her breathing change. Not faster, but heavier, like a weight had been added to each inhale. There's a victim account in my files, she said. Coded because I protect my sources. But the timeline, it matches. There was a consolidation event 6 years ago. The network eliminated anyone who could identify the upper tier of the operation. Multiple incidents across 18 months, all staged. Accidents, break-ins, medical emergencies. She stopped scrolling. I have 2 of them documented with hard evidence. I've been working to verify a third. She looked at him. I didn't know about your mother and sister. I didn't have their names. No, you wouldn't. His voice was entirely level. No one came looking. No one filed a challenge to the accident ruling. I handled the investigation privately. You handled it by making sure the men who carried out the physical act were no longer able to do so again. He said it without inflection, without apology. That's as far as I got. The men at the operational level, not the people who ordered it. Elena set the phone down. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Not fear, not sympathy, something between assessment and something else he didn't have a clean name for. Those names, she said, the people who ordered it, they might be on the drive. Yes? And you want access to the drive. I want to understand what you found that's different from taking it. Is it? He glanced at her again. If I wanted the drive, I would have taken it on the mountain. The logic of that sat between them for a moment. Okay, she said at last. Not agreement, exactly. Not trust. But a provisional lowering of the weapon, a door cracked instead of thrown open. Tell me about the house. The house was in Milford County, 40 minutes south, a property that had been purchased through a corporate structure 3 years ago and had sat largely empty since. It was not a large house, 4 rooms, a covered porch, a fence line that backed against state forest land. Damon had used it once as a staging location for something that no longer mattered and had not closed it down afterward because he had a general policy of not closing down options he'd paid for. He walked through it while Elena stood in the front room with her coat still on, phone in hand, watching him check the rooms with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone doing a thing they have done before. He came back to her in 4 minutes. Clear, he said. You thought someone might be here. I thought it was worth checking. She took her coat off. Underneath, she was wearing a dark knit sweater, and the bruise on her jaw was more visible in the interior light, a spreading shadow that went from ear to chin. Someone had hit her, he registered again. Not tonight, not in the storm. The swelling was older than that. She had not mentioned it, and he had not asked. It was her information to give or withhold. The drive needs to be copied, she said, sitting at the kitchen table. Multiple locations. Before anything else. If someone already searched my apartment, they're going to start closing options. I have a secure upload protocol. I can have the content distributed to 3 separate off-site locations by morning. She looked at him. You do that regularly? Information that needs to not disappear, yes. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat. I run an organization. The same principles that apply to criminal evidence apply to any evidence. She almost laughed. It didn't quite happen, but he saw it try to. I'm going to need coffee before I process the full absurdity of this situation. He got up and found the kitchen stocked with the basics. He'd made a call on the way down from the mountain, and someone had done a run before they arrived. He put coffee on and came back to the table, and they sat with the drive between them on the table surface like a small, ugly thing that had somehow become the center of everything. Walk me through it, he said. Elena looked at the drive. The network is called, internally, the Meridian Chain. I got the name from a financial document 18 months ago and didn't understand what I was looking at for another 6 months. It's a trafficking operation, not street level, not disorganized. It's structured like a corporation, hierarchical, compliance functions, legal insulation through 3 layers of legitimate businesses. She paused. The entry point is a labor recruitment company called Halcyon Staffing. On paper, it places hospitality workers in resort properties across the Northeast. In practice, she stopped. The coffee maker hissed. In practice, it moves people, mostly women, mostly from Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Some domestic. People who were promised legitimate employment and found something else when they arrived. Damon's face stayed still. His hands on the table stayed still. Inside his chest, something was doing what it always did when he came close to this specific subject, which was to contract painfully around a point that had never healed. How many people? He said. Conservative estimate, across 8 years of operation, several hundred, maybe more. The documentation I have covers a 4-year window with partial visibility into the rest. She looked at him. Your sister, don't. The word came out quiet and hard. Not yet. I need to hear the rest of it first. She nodded. Accepted the boundary without pushing on it. The money moves through Eastbridge Partners as a midpoint, she continued. From Halcyon to Eastbridge, and then out to a series of holding entities with legitimate revenue to mix against. It's good laundering. It took my financial source 8 weeks to trace it far enough to confirm what he was looking at. She reached across and picked up the drive. What's on here are the documents that prove Eastbridge is the central clearing mechanism, names of beneficial owners, account numbers, internal communications. She set it down again. 2 of the beneficial owners are in public life. Damon waited. One is corporate, senior officer at a real estate investment trust with city contracts. She paused. The other is Caleb Mercer. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee maker finished its cycle. Damon looked at her and understood that she had been carrying this particular piece of information at a very specific distance, close enough to know it, far enough to not let it detonate her ability to function, for some period of time that had been deeply corrosive. Your editor, he said. My editor? She said it flatly. The man who assigned me this story, who managed my resources, who knew every source I developed and every document I located and every meeting I attended. He was feeding information to the organization. He was feeding information to the organization. She turned the drive over in her fingers. I found it 4 days ago. A name in the beneficial ownership record that should not have been there. I went back through 18 months of decisions on the investigation. Sources who stopped talking, leads that went cold, a witness who relocated unexpectedly to another state. And it fits. It all fits. Every significant setback I had over 18 months corresponds to a moment when Caleb had sufficient information to warn them. You didn't confront him. I didn't confront him. I went to the mountain instead. She set the drive down. Because the contact who left the documents, the source I can't name, he told me there was a final piece up there, something that would close the last gap in the ownership chain. I didn't tell Marcus exactly where I was going. I told him I was following a lead. I told Caleb I was working from home. But Caleb found out. Caleb found out. She looked at the table, which means he has someone watching me, following my car maybe, or someone at the paper who monitors my movements. She paused. Either way, he knew I was going to that cabin. He had time to get there first and lock the door. Damon sat with that. He poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her, and drank from the other. It was bad coffee, the kind that tastes primarily of the filter and the temperature of desperation, and he drank it anyway. So you have an editor who is a beneficial owner in a trafficking network, he said, who has been managing your investigation for 18 months, who locked you in a mountain cabin in a blizzard. Yes. And you have a drive with the documentation that proves it. Yes. And your apartment has been searched. Yes. He set his cup down. They're not just trying to recover the drive, Elena. If Caleb locked that door, if they searched the apartment, they've moved past containment. She met his eyes. I know. They're trying to eliminate the problem, which at this point is you. She held his gaze without flinching, and he respected that. The particular steadiness of someone who has already had this thought and sat with it in the cold and come out the other side still functional. I know that too. Which means you need to move faster than they expect. I need to publish, she said, but I can't publish through the paper. Caleb controls what comes out of the paper. I need another pathway, a direct release to the public record, somewhere with legal protection. She ran a hand through her hair, which was still slightly damp from the snow. That requires me to stay alive long enough to do it. Yes, he said. It does. She looked at him across the table with the directness of someone who has run out of room for indirectness. So what are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything yet. I'm listening. You said the evidence connects to your family. If it does, you have a stake in this being published. I have a stake in the people responsible being stopped, he said. Whether that happens through your publication or through other means is a secondary concern. Other means. She said it back to him, not as a question. I have resources you don't. Contacts and parts of the network structure that don't appear in financial documents. Operational knowledge of how this kind of organization moves, who it uses, what it does when it's threatened. He paused. You have evidence that can survive in court. I have the ability to move in places where courts have no reach. You're talking about a partnership. I'm talking about an alignment of interests. That's a more careful way to say the same thing. He almost smiled. Yes. Elena stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside was darkness and the edge of the state forest, the snow having tapered to nothing, the sky starting to develop the faint gray suggestion of a morning that was still 2 hours away. She stood there for a long moment with her coffee cup, and he watched her work through it. Not the fear which she'd already made her peace with, but the logic, the implications, the shape of what she would be agreeing to. You killed the men who murdered your family, she said to the window. Yes. And you feel... She stopped, started differently. Are you planning to kill anyone else in connection with this? I'm planning to make it impossible for the people responsible to walk away from what they did, he said. What form that takes depends on what they do next. She turned around. I need you to understand something. If I partner with you, on any level. And it comes out afterward that anyone involved in this ended up dead. My investigation dies with them. The story becomes about that, about you, about what you are. I understand. Do you? You're telling me that the value of what you've built, 8 months, victim accounts, financial documentation, public record, depends on a clean line between your methods and mine. Yes, and you're asking me to keep that line intact. I'm asking you to keep yourself on your side of it. She held his gaze. Can you do that? It was a direct question, and she deserved a direct answer. The honest answer was that he didn't know, because the people he was ultimately trying to reach had killed his mother and sister and staged it as an accident and had continued operating for 6 years as if the cost had been worth paying. The honest answer was that there was a version of this that ended with him in a room with the people who gave that order, and he did not currently trust himself to specify what would happen in that room. But he also understood, more clearly than he had at the start of the night, that Elena Voss and her 8 months of work and her drive full of documentation represented something he could not accomplish through his own methods. A permanent, unchallengeable, public record that would outlast whatever he did privately. If he wanted the network dismantled rather than merely interrupted, he needed her to succeed. I can try, he said. She studied him. That's more honest than I expected. I told you, I'm not your enemy tonight. Tonight? She caught it again. He could see her file it. A journalist to the end. She sat back down. All right, she said. Let's start with what's on the drive. They worked until 5 a.m. He had a laptop at the property, an old one, deliberately isolated from his regular network infrastructure, and she plugged the drive in and they went through the documents file by file in the kitchen while the sky outside moved through the stages of false dawn. She was systematic and fast, annotating as she went, explaining the significance of each document in the compressed, precise shorthand of someone who has given this presentation in her own head many times. The Eastbridge ownership structure was more complex than he'd expected. 7 layers, 3 jurisdictions, each entity owning a fractional interest in the next, a structure that would require a forensic accountant and significant time to fully untangle. But the documentation she had taken from the cabin included something that cut through the complexity, a single internal communication, addressed between 2 individuals using initials only, discussing the February of 6 years ago in terms that were operational rather than financial. Consolidation phase. Northern accounts. V family situation resolved. Asset transfer to proceed. V family. Damon read it twice and then looked at the table surface and breathed through his nose and said nothing. Elena, across from him, said nothing either. She was watching him. Not with sympathy, because sympathy was not what this moment required, and she seemed to understand that. With the careful attention of someone who is witnessing something real and has the discipline not to interfere with it. He breathed. The kitchen was quiet. V family, he said at last. Yes. They wrote it as a business memo. They structured everything as a business operation. That's part of what makes the documentation so significant. There's no ambiguity about intent. She paused. The initials in the communication, I've tentatively identified one of them. It's consistent with the financial signature of one of the beneficial owners. I need one more piece to confirm. What piece? A direct link between the initials and a named individual. Right now I have financial circumstantial and the document. I need something that connects the sender to a real person. Damon looked at the document on screen. V family situation resolved. He had been looking for 6 years for evidence that it had not been an accident. He had found the men who carried it out, the 2-man crew who had run his mother's car off the road on an icy February morning, who had walked away and made a call and been paid. He had found them through 3 months of the kind of investigative work his organization was equipped to do, and he had taken care of them in the way his world took care of things. But the person who had made that call, the person who had approved the line item in a business memo, he had never gotten there. I can get that piece, he said. Elena looked at him. How? Because the person who runs the operational side of Eastbridge's security, the person who coordinates responses when the organization feels threatened, is a man named Derek Soule. He runs 3 legitimate security companies as a front. I've crossed paths with him twice in the past 4 years. He paused. He's not a beneficial owner. He's not in the financial documents, but he's the mechanism between the decision makers and the operations. If someone locked your cabin door tonight, it went through Derek's soul. You know where he is? I know where he can be found. He looked at her. I won't touch him. I'll find a way to get him on record, something your investigation can use. Elena was quiet for a moment, then, how do you know Derek Soul's connection to Eastbridge? Because 3 years ago, I was tracing the financial chain myself. I got to a point where someone started pushing back, not legally, operationally. An attempt to disrupt my organization's supply chain. A message, essentially. I traced the disruption to Soul. He paused. I stopped tracing when Soul disappeared for a while. I assumed he'd left the network. I was wrong. He came back. Or he never left. I made a mistake in the assessment. Elena looked at him with the expression she'd been wearing on and off all night, the one he still didn't entirely have a name for. You're very willing to admit mistakes. Mistakes that I don't name tend to recur, he said. She seemed to consider that. Then her phone buzzed on the table between them, and she picked it up and her face changed. She read it, set the phone down, and the stillness that had been in her face all night cracked, slightly, around the edges. It's Marcus, she said. What does it say? He did some digging tonight. While I was on the mountain, while I was out of contact, he went through the paper's internal communication logs. She stopped. He found something. Tell me. Caleb Mercer has been in contact with a law firm that represents 3 of the holding entities connected to Eastbridge. The contact started 18 months ago, the same month I was assigned the trafficking story. She picked the phone up, put it down again. He assigned me that story, Damon. He gave it to me. He let me build it for 18 months. Because he could see everything you were developing. Because he could see everything I was developing. She said it like someone arriving at a conclusion they had known was coming, and finding that knowing didn't make the arrival easier. He used me as an intelligence-gathering operation. Everything I found, every source I developed, every document I located, he was passing it back, so they could see how much we knew, so they could manage the exposure. She paused. And when I found Eastbridge, when I found the ownership documents, he decided 18 months of intelligence was worth more to him than I was. The kitchen was very quiet. They're going to try again, Damon said. Yes. Not just the apartment. They know the drive is still out there. They know you're still out there. He looked at her directly. Caleb knows your sources, your colleagues, everyone connected to your investigation. Elena's face had gone flat and controlled, the expression of someone who is running calculations and not letting the answers show. Marcus, she said, Marcus Hale knows where you are? He knows I got out of the mountain. He doesn't know this address. She was already picking up the phone. But if Caleb is watching Marcus, the phone rang in her hand, not a notification, not a buzz. A call, loud in the kitchen silence, and the name on the screen was the one name that changed the temperature in the room entirely. Caleb Mercer. Elena looked at the screen, then at Damon. Her face was entirely composed and entirely unreadable, and her thumb was hovering over the answer icon, and somewhere beneath the composure was something that was not fear and not anger, but was made of both. He's checking if I'm alive, Damon said quietly. Yes. If you don't answer, he knows you know. If I answer, you buy time. The phone rang a third time. Elena looked at it, and in the 3 seconds before she answered, Damon watched something happen in her face that was not simple. The decision to use a skill she had not known she would need, to perform something she did not feel, to step into a conversation with a man who had tried to end her life and give him nothing. She answered, Caleb? Her voice was easy, slightly tired, entirely normal. Sorry, I was asleep. What time is it? Damon listened to the silence that was Caleb Mercer's response, which he couldn't hear, and watched Elena's face, which he could, and felt a slow, cold certainty developing in the base of his chest. I'm home, she said. I got back a few hours ago. Road conditions were rough. A pause. listening. The source didn't show. I got the documents they left, but the meeting never happened. Another pause. Yeah, I know. I'll come in this morning. We can go over it. She listened for another moment, and something shifted in her eyes. Not in her voice, but in her eyes. A bright, sharp thing that she covered almost immediately. Sure, Caleb. See you then? She hung up. She set the phone very carefully on the table, and her hand when she withdrew it was steady, and then she looked at Damon. He knows, she said. He heard it in whatever I said. Something was off. She shook her head. Or he already knew. He had someone watching the mountain road. What did he say that told you? He said he was glad I was safe. She paused. Caleb Mercer has never in 3 years said anything like that to me. He called me at 5 a.m. and he said he was glad I was safe, and he meant the exact opposite of every word. Damon stood up. We need to move. The drive. Copy it first, right now. He was already moving to the window, looking at the driveway, the road. Where can you send it? Someone completely outside the paper. Someone Caleb doesn't know about. My lawyer, she said. She's outside my professional network. Caleb doesn't have her name. Send it, now. And then we need to be somewhere else before morning. Elena was already at the laptop, hands moving. You said you could get to Derek's soul. Yes. Then that's the next step. We need him on record before Caleb has time to close the circle. She hit send. Watched the progress bar begin. Because right now, Caleb is making the same calculation you made for me on the mountain. He's weighing the cost of a problem he can't contain. She looked up. And he's going to decide we're cheaper to eliminate than to manage. The progress bar moved. 43%, 51%, 67%. Outside, in the pre-dawn gray of Milford County, a car turned slowly onto the road at the far end of the fence line, headlights off, moving at the pace of something that did not want to be heard. Damon saw it through the window. Elena, he said. She looked up. How long does that take to finish? She looked at the screen. 30 seconds. He looked at the car, which had stopped at the end of the driveway and was sitting there with its engine running and its lights off and its occupants invisible behind dark glass. And he understood with absolute clarity that 30 seconds was the precise amount of time they did not have. The progress bar hit 100% at the same moment Damon said, "Leave the laptop." Elena pulled the drive and was on her feet before the instruction finished. She didn't ask why. She had seen his face at the window, and she had turned and seen the car at the end of the driveway, and her body had made the decision before her mind caught up, the way bodies do when they have been running on adrenaline long enough that instinct starts processing faster than thought. Damon moved to the kitchen counter and pulled open the second drawer, which Elena would have had no reason to know contained anything other than silverware and takeout menus, but which in fact contained a compact 9mm that had been placed there when the house was stocked. He checked it in a single practiced motion, not hurrying, the way someone moves when speed is a product of precision and not of panic. Back door, he said. Where does it go? Fence line, then state forest, about 60 meters of open ground. They'll have the back covered. Maybe. Move anyway. She moved. He followed, and they went through the back door into the cold that was a different quality from the mountain cold. Lower elevation, less wind, but carrying the particular damp chill of ground that had been frozen for months and was not ready to give it up. The sky was gray-white, the kind of pre-dawn that makes distances hard to read. The fence line was 30 meters away across frozen grass. Elena ran, not a panicked run, a controlled one, low and fast, and he ran beside her, and they hit the fence at the same moment, and she went through the gap he indicated without hesitation, and he followed. And then they were in the tree line, and he put his hand on her arm, and they stopped and went still. Behind them, at the house, he heard the front door go. Not knocked, forced. He counted 4 seconds of interior noise, movement, at least 2 people, fast and systematic, and then silence. They were looking for bodies. Finding none, they would move outward in a pattern. The back door would be checked within 90 seconds. He put his mouth close to Elena's ear. Stay beside me. Match my pace. Don't use your phone. She nodded, close enough that he felt the movement rather than saw it. They went into the forest, a chasm. He had walked this property line once, 3 years ago, when he was assessing it as a location. He remembered the general shape. The state forest extended roughly 2 kilometers before hitting a service road that connected to a county route. He navigated by the gray light filtering through bare branches and by the memory of a man who had learned, early and under circumstances that were not optional, to retain the details of spaces he might someday need to move through in the dark. Elena kept pace without complaint. She was not a runner. Her breathing told him that, the controlled effort of someone pushing beyond their normal range. But she was disciplined about it, managing the exertion with the same focused economy she applied to everything else. She didn't stumble. She watched where he stepped and placed her feet in approximately the same positions, minimizing noise on the frozen ground cover. After 10 minutes, they stopped behind a deadfall that was wide enough to provide cover and far enough into the trees that the house was invisible. He listened. No pursuit sounds. Either they hadn't moved into the forest yet, or they had and were being very quiet, which was more concerning. "How many?" Elena said under her breath. "At least 2 in the car, possibly a second vehicle I didn't see." "Derek Soul's people? Or Caleb's? At this point, the distinction may not matter. If Caleb is connected to Soul, the operational response is the same." She had her back against the deadfall and her arms crossed over her chest, conserving heat, her breath visible in the cold air. The bruise on her jaw looked worse in the gray morning light, something that had been developing overnight, a slow bloom from whatever had happened before the mountain. "That bruise," he said. "When did that happen?" She looked at him. 2 days ago. Someone followed me from the paper. I made it to my car, but they got a hand in the door before I could close it." "They hit you through a car door?" "They tried to pull me out. I drove." She said it flatly, the way you describe a thing you have already processed and filed. "That's when I knew I had maybe 48 hours before the situation became unmanageable." "Why didn't you go to the police?" She looked at him with an expression that said she had expected a smarter question. "Because one of the holding entities connected to Eastbridge has a contractual relationship with the Caldwell Municipal Police Department security consulting firm. I documented it 3 months ago. I have no way of knowing how deep that goes or who inside the department is covered." She paused. "Does that answer your question?" "Yes," he said. "It does." He checked his phone. No signal in the forest. The trees and the terrain were eating it. He needed to get to higher ground or to the service road before he could make the calls that needed to be made. "The service road is about 1.5 kilometers north," he said. "If we reach it, I can get a vehicle here inside 20 minutes. "Your people?" "One person. Someone I trust completely." Elena looked at him for a moment with the measuring expression she had been wearing on and off since the mountain. "How many people know about this house?" "2. Myself and the person who stalked it. And they sent 2 vehicles." He understood the implication. The house was in a corporate structure. Eastbridge's lawyers are better than mine at tracing corporate structures. He paused. "It's also possible they had my Range Rover on a traffic camera somewhere on the county route." "How long ago?" 2 hours, maybe less." She absorbed that. "So they've been moving since Caleb called me, since he knew I was alive and not at my apartment." She looked at the tree line, back toward where the house was. "He has people positioned very quickly for 5 a.m. "Yes." "Which means this response was partially prepared in advance. They expected I might get off the mountain." "The door lock was improvised," he said. "A blizzard is a reasonable containment method if you don't have time to plan something more permanent, but they would have had a contingency. A contingency that involves Derek Soul's operational resources. Or something adjacent to it. The speed and the coordination." He stopped. Something was moving at the far left edge of his vision, about 60 meters back through the trees. Not an animal. The pace was wrong, and the silhouette was wrong. He put his hand on Elena's arm, and she went still immediately. They waited. The figure moved through a gap in the trees and then was gone, moving south, parallel to the fence line, not toward them, sweeping, one person visible, which meant there were others he wasn't seeing. "We move now," he said, very quiet. "North. Fast." They reached the service road at 6:12 a.m. It was a single-lane gravel track, municipality maintained in the summer and abandoned in winter, the surface frozen hard and clear enough to move on without trouble. Damon made the call he needed to make from the road's edge, 2 minutes, clipped and specific. And then they stood in the cold and waited, and Elena did not ask questions, which he was starting to understand was characteristic. She asked questions when she needed information, and she did not fill silence with noise when noise was not useful. It was a quality he recognized because he shared it and had rarely encountered it in someone from outside his world. The vehicle that arrived was a gray sedan, unremarkable, driven by a man in his 50s named Garrett, who had been with Damon for 11 years and who looked at Elena once, at Damon, and said nothing beyond, "Where?" "East Side Safe House," Damon said. "The Perrin Street one." Garrett drove. Elena sat in the back beside Damon and looked out the window at the county road turning into city outskirts, turning into the familiar grid of Caldwell, and he could see her processing, the slight movement of her eyes that meant she was running through something systematically, checking corners. "The upload to your lawyer," he said. "It completed." "Yes." "Before we left." "Then the evidence is somewhere they can't reach it. Everything after this is about being able to go public without getting stopped first." "I need to reach Marcus," she said. "He's the only person at the paper I'm certain isn't compromised." "Call him now." She dialed. The call connected on the second ring, which meant Marcus Hale had been awake and waiting, which meant he was more alarmed than his text messages had indicated. "Elena." His voice came through the speaker, thin with relief, and something underneath the relief that was not calm. "Where are you? I'm safe. I'm moving. Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully and not ask me where I am yet." She paused. "I know about Caleb." Silence on the line. "Marcus." "I know," he said. "I know you know. That's... Elena, I found something else. After I sent you that message about the law firm contacts, I kept going." He stopped. His breathing on the line was audible. "I found communications that go back further than 18 months. A lot further." Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "How far back?" "The original trafficking story, the one that was killed 4 years ago. Before you came to the paper, before Caleb assigned your version of it, there was a previous investigation. A freelancer named Thomas Wren. He was building something similar to what you've built. He got to Eastbridge, and then the story was killed and Wren disappeared." Marcus paused. "The kill decision was Caleb's. Wren, I can't find him. He left the industry, and I can't find a current location." Elena was very still. "He didn't just leave the industry." "I don't know that." "I do." She was looking straight ahead, her voice flat. "A freelancer who got to Eastbridge and then disappeared. That's not a coincidence, Marcus. That's the consolidation pattern. It's in my files, I documented it. Multiple people who got close to the operation, and then..." She stopped. "What else?" "The assignment. When Caleb gave you the story 4 years ago," Marcus corrected himself. 2 years ago, when he gave it to you. I found his communication with the paper's publisher around that time. He recommended you specifically. He went around the normal assignment process to make sure you got it." "Why?" "Because you're the best investigative reporter on staff. Because you would build the most credible and comprehensive version of the story." Marcus's voice had gone quieter, more careful, like someone stepping across uncertain ground. "And because he knew that if you built it, he could see exactly how far anyone could get, how much evidence could be assembled, what the full exposure looked like." He paused. "You were the test case, Elena. He needed to know how much they needed to protect against." The car was quiet. Garrett drove with his eyes front. Damon watched Elena's face and watched the information arrive and settle into her, watched her absorb the specific cruelty of it, that the work she had done, the 8 months of sources and documents and danger, had been curated by the man she was exposing. She did not make a sound. Her face did not collapse. But something in her jaw changed, a tightening that went beyond control into the territory of a person holding themselves together through the sheer mechanical effort of will. "Send me everything you found," she said to Marcus. "All of it. And Marcus, get out of the building, right now. Don't go back to the paper today. Elena, Caleb knows I know. He made a move this morning. If he thinks you've been helping me, you're not safe at that building. Do you understand? A pause. Yes. Go somewhere public, somewhere with cameras, and send me everything. She hung up. The car moved through morning traffic, unremarkable among unremarkable vehicles, and nobody spoke for 30 seconds. Then Elena said, "He built me as an instrument." Damon didn't respond because the statement wasn't a question and didn't require a response. It required the space to exist. "He chose me because I'm good," she said. "He let me develop sources, build evidence, get close enough to map the full structure. Because the closer I got, the better his intelligence became. And when I got far enough," she stopped. "He was going to kill the story and use everything I'd found to help them close every gap." She paused. "And then kill me to remove the one person who could testify to what the evidence meant." "Yes," Damon said. "I handed him everything." "You handed him a version. The drive is still yours. The upload to your lawyer is done. The evidence still exists." "The sources don't," she said. "The sources I developed, the people who talked to me. If Caleb passed their identities back," she turned to look at Damon with an expression that was the first uncontrolled thing he'd seen from her all night, a crack in the composed surface that showed something raw and deeply frightened beneath it, not for herself. "Some of those people are victims. People who survived and came forward because I told them they would be protected." The implications of that landed in the car like something with mass. "How many?" he said. "4 direct. People who gave me testimony on record, who believe it's secure." She shook her head. "If Caleb passed their names, if they were identified, I need those names," Damon said. She looked at him. "Not for what you're thinking," he said. "I have people who can check on them. Quietly, without creating a footprint." "Check on them how?" "Confirm they're safe, physically present, unharmed." He held her gaze. "That's all. I'm not going to involve them in anything. I just need to know if the damage is already done." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her phone and pulled up a coded contact list and turned the screen toward him, and he looked at the 4 names and did what she needed him to do, which was look, register, and not react. He sent a text to a number that was not Garrett's and not anyone Elena knew, with 4 locations and 4 instructions that each said the same thing: check and report. Do not engage. Then he put the phone away. "Perrin Street," Garrett said quietly from the front. 2 minutes. The Perrin Street safe house was above a dry cleaning business, accessible through a back staircase that smelled of solvent and old carpet. 3 rooms. Blackout curtains already drawn, a table with a power strip and 2 charged laptops and a box of provisions that suggested Garrett had been managing this location with the same quiet thoroughness he applied to everything. Elena sat down at one of the laptops and started working immediately, not asking permission, not pausing to assess the space. He watched her open the files Marcus had sent, already waiting in an encrypted channel she accessed through the second laptop, and began cross-referencing with the drive's contents. He sat across from her and poured coffee from a thermos that Garrett had left on the table and drank it, and watched her work, and thought about Derek's soul. Soul was the mechanism. He was the operational layer between the beneficial owners, the people whose initials appeared in business memos discussing the elimination of families, and the people who actually carried out the eliminations. Getting Soul on record meant either finding a way to record him speaking about his operations, which required access, or finding documentation that connected his identity to the communications Elena already had. There was a third option, which Damon had not mentioned to Elena, which was to bring Soul in physically and have a conversation of the kind Damon's world was equipped to conduct. He was not going to do that. He had told Elena he would stay on his side of the line, and he understood why that mattered, and he intended to keep the commitment. But the option existed in his mind as a kind of negative space, a door he was aware of and was choosing not to open. His phone buzzed, a response from the number he'd texted. He read it again. 3 of the 4 sources were confirmed present and unharmed. The 4th, a woman named in Elena's coded list as Source C, had not answered her door, and her neighbor reported she had left with luggage 2 days ago. 2 days ago, the day before Elena went to the mountain. He looked at Elena across the table, at her back bent over the laptop, at the drive sitting beside her left hand. Elena. She didn't look up. Give me a minute. I need you to look at something. The tone in his voice made her look up. He showed her the message. She read it. The color that had come back into her face on the drive began a slow retreat. Source C, she said. She's the one who gave me the financial routing documents. She's the one who first identified Eastbridge as a clearing mechanism. She set the phone down. If she ran 2 days ago. She knew, Damon said. Or she was warned. Or she was taken. Elena pressed her palms flat on the table. If they have her, they have the routing chain in real time. They have the ability to move funds before I can document the current state of the accounts. She stared at the table surface. The evidence I have is the historical record. If they liquidate and restructure now, the current operation becomes invisible. I'd have documentation of something that no longer exists in the form I described it. How fast can they restructure? Eastbridge? Days. Maybe less if they've been preparing for this. She looked at him. They've had 18 months of my investigation to prepare. They know exactly what I know. They can make themselves look like a different company before a court could freeze assets. Damon was already thinking. Unless someone freezes assets first, you'd need a court order. I'd need a friendly judge in 12 hours. He paused. I know a judge. Elena stared at him. You know a judge who would freeze assets based on a credible evidenced claim from a journalist whose documentation I can corroborate independently. Yes. He held her gaze. I told you my tools are different. A federal judge who owes me a significant personal debt and who is not connected to anyone in Caldwell's legal infrastructure is one of my tools. She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between appalled and calculating, the face of a person reconfiguring their map of the world in real time. If you do that, and it later comes out, the freeze gets challenged and the story becomes about me, he said. I know. Which is why the filing goes through a clean legal channel. The judge's clerk files it based on documentation from your lawyer. My name is nowhere in the chain. He paused. I make a call, that's all. The mechanism does the rest. Elena was quiet for a moment, then, how much of this city do you have? It was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not hostile. She wanted to know the actual scope. Enough to do what needs to be done tonight, he said. Less than people assume. More than is comfortable to explain. She looked at him for a long 3 seconds. Make the call. He made the call. 4 minutes, low and specific, standing by the window with the blackout curtain cracked 1 inch. He came back to the table and sat and said, 12 hours. The filing happens at 9 a.m. when the clerk's office opens. 9 hours, she said. 9 hours. She turned back to the laptop. He watched her open a new document and begin typing, fast, and he understood she was drafting, pulling the structure of her investigation into a form that could be published independently of the paper, a direct release to a legal repository and public record that would bypass Caleb Mercer entirely. She was doing it now because she understood that 9 hours was the window and they were already inside it. He was 30 seconds into watching her draft when his phone rang. The number was one he had not seen in 3 years. A number he had saved under a name that was not a real name, a placeholder, because the person it belonged to had refused to give him anything more than a contact channel. He answered. Virelli. The voice was male, precise, with the measured cadence of someone who has trained themselves to eliminate regional accent entirely. I've been watching your evening with some interest. Damon's hand tightened on the phone by a fraction. Elena had looked up at his face, reading it. Soul, Damon said. Elena went completely still. I understand you've been having a productive conversation with a journalist, Derek Soul said. I wanted to reach out before the morning got more complicated than it needs to be. How did you get this number? The same way I get most things, patience. A pause. You and I have an understanding from 3 years ago. You stayed in your lane and I stayed in mine. That arrangement worked. Until tonight. Until your journalist started following threads that led to Eastbridge, which led to you, apparently. Another pause. I want to make you an offer. I'm listening. The woman. Her investigation. All of it goes away. Quietly. The sources she compromised are managed. The documentation becomes inaccessible. And you go back to your organization with a guarantee of operational non-interference for 5 years. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone who considers what they're offering to be objectively reasonable. That's a significant guarantee. 5 years of no disruption from us, in exchange for one journalist. Damon looked at Elena. She had heard enough of it through the phone's speaker to understand the shape of what was being offered. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes were on his face, not with pleading, not with fear, with the direct specific gaze of someone who is giving you the space to make a decision and trusting you to make the right one, or bracing for the wrong one. He could not entirely tell which. "No," Damon said. A pause. "I want to be sure you understand what you're declining." "I understand. 5 years is a significant period. Your organization?" "I heard the offer, Soul. The answer is no." A longer pause this time. The quality of the silence on the other end of the line changed, something that had been transactional acquiring a different edge. "Then we'll have to resolve this a different way." "I expected we would." "I want you to think about what that means for the people around you, not just the journalist, the people you've had in the field tonight checking on her sources, the man driving your car, the infrastructure you've built over 20 years. A pause. "We have a long memory, Varelli, longer than yours." "I know what your memory looks like," Damon said. "I read it in a business memo tonight. Family situation resolved. That's what 20 years of your memory produces. You should know that I've been patient longer than you have." The line went quiet. "You found the memo," Soul said. Quieter now, recalibrating. "We found everything," Damon said. "All of it. It's already somewhere you can't reach." He hung up. The room was very quiet. He set the phone down on the table and looked at it for a moment, then looked at Elena. "He'll move immediately," she said. "Yes. He just told you what he has and what he's willing to do. He was measuring you." "Yes. And now he knows you're not going to fold, so the next step isn't negotiation." She closed the laptop. "How long before he deploys something?" "Less than an hour." He stood. "We need to move again." "Damon." She said his name for the first time, and it had a weight in it, a directness that was different from everything else she'd said to him. "The judge's filing, the publication pathway, the evidence upload. We've set things in motion that we can't stop now. Whatever happens next, I know. We're past the point where either of us can make this smaller than it is." "I know that too." She stood up and picked up the drive and put it in her jacket pocket and picked up both laptops, tucking them under her arm, and looked at him with an expression that was not resignation and was not courage exactly, but was something that lived between the two. "Then let's not waste the lead we have," she said. He reached for his phone to call Garrett. It buzzed in his hand before he could dial. A message from the number he'd sent to check on sources. "Source C found. She didn't run. She was moved. Currently held at a location in the warehouse district. She's alive. They're keeping her alive because they need to know how much she told your journalist. Once they know..." The message cut off there. Damon read it once, read it again, and then looked at Elena, who was already reading his face. "What?" she said. He turned the phone so she could see the message. She read it. The color left her face completely, not gradually this time, but all at once, like someone had turned off a light. "She's alive," Elena said. "Right now." "But once they've finished with her..." "Yes." Elena set the laptops back on the table. She put both hands flat on the surface and leaned on them and looked at the wall and breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. He watched her arrive somewhere inside herself that was darker and harder than where she'd been a moment ago. Watched her make the calculation, the story, the publication, the evidence, the 9-hour window, and then watch it change shape as something else entered the equation. "She came forward because I promised she'd be protected," Elena said to the wall. Damon said nothing. "I need you to get her out," she said. "That means going into a location Derek Soul controls with people Soul knows I have. I know what it means. It means crossing the line you made me agree not to cross." She turned and looked at him. Her face was entirely stripped now, no composure, no professional surface, Just the direct and terrible clarity of a person who has arrived at the moment where every principle they've been operating on meets something it cannot survive unchanged. Not the same line, she said. Rescuing someone from captivity is not... It will require the same methods, he said quietly. I can't walk into a warehouse Soul is running and extract someone with a conversation. She held his gaze. I know. And when it comes out, I know. Your story? I know, Damon. Her voice broke on the last word, just at the edge, and she pulled it back. I know what it costs. I know what it does to the publication. I know what it does to the clean line between your methods and mine. She straightened. She is a real person who trusted me and is being held in a warehouse and will be killed when they're finished using her. The clean line doesn't... She stopped, breathed. I can't buy my story with her life. He looked at her for a long time, longer than he needed to. The room was very quiet, and outside the Perrin Street traffic was beginning to build with the sounds of a city waking up that had no idea what was moving through it. All right, he said. He picked up the phone and made a call that was different from the others. Shorter, quieter, with a different kind of precision, the kind that comes from long practice with this specific type of request. And when he hung up, he looked at Elena and said, Get the evidence to your lawyer's cloud backup again. Everything. All of it. Because what happens next is going to move fast, and there won't be a second chance to make sure it's secure. She was already at the laptop. He was already at the door. And somewhere in the warehouse district, in a building that did not appear on any of Elena's financial charts, a woman named Source C was still alive and the clock on that was running. And Damon Varelli, who had spent 20 years building a world on the principle that emotion was a liability, walked out into the gray morning of Caldwell, carrying something in his chest that he had not allowed himself to carry since February of 6 years ago. It felt like his mother's voice. It felt like the thing they had taken when they wrote V Family Situation resolved in a business memo and filed it and moved on. He was not going to let them file this one. The warehouse district at 7 a.m. smelled like diesel and standing water and the specific cold of buildings that had never been designed for human comfort. Damon moved along the east wall of the Target building with two men he trusted, not because they were loyal in the sentimental sense, but because their professional interests and his had been aligned for long enough that the distinction had stopped mattering. Renko was on his left, ex-military, with the particular economy of movement that training leaves in the body permanently. Salas was covering the south approach, out of sight, communicating through a single earpiece that Damon wore in his left ear. The building was a converted cold storage facility, 4 stories of poured concrete that had once held refrigeration equipment and now held whatever Soul's organization found useful to hold. Damon had never been inside it. He had driven past it twice in previous years and registered it the way he registered every building in this district, as a data point, a coordinate, a potential future fact. Tonight, it was the fact. South entrance is 1 man, Salas said in his ear. Rotating, 3-minute interval. Loading dock? 2, stationary. They're not expecting company from the north. They will be, Renko said quietly beside him. Damon checked his watch. 7:04. He had given Elena 2 instructions before he left Perrin Street. Stay inside, finish the draft, and if he was not back or in contact by 9 a.m., send everything to the legal repository and go public through whatever channel was available. She had looked at him with the expression of someone who understood what if I'm not back meant and was choosing not to say anything about it. She had said, don't get killed. He had said, I'll try. It was the most honest exchange he could manage. The north wall had a service door that the building's original schematic, pulled from a city archive 3 years ago as part of his general intelligence on the district, showed connected to a stairwell. Building schematics were reliable until they weren't. He was operating on 60% confidence, which was not as high as he preferred and was higher than he sometimes had. On my mark, he said to Renko. The guard rotation on the south entrance completed its cycle. 3 minutes. They moved. The service door was not locked, which was either fortunate or a problem. He pushed through it low and fast, and Renko came in behind him, and they were in a corridor that smelled of cold concrete and something chemical that he didn't stop to identify. The stairwell was where the schematics said it would be. He took the stairs up, instead of staying on the ground floor, because people securing a location at ground level leave their upper approaches underguarded, and because the message had said she was being held, and held people were not kept in open spaces. Second floor. Clear. Third floor. He heard voices before he reached the landing. Two men, the cadence of people who are bored and warm and not expecting the next 60 seconds of their shift to be different from the previous 6 hours. He made eye contact with Renko. Renko nodded once. What happened next took 11 seconds and was not loud. Damon moved first through the stairwell door, and the nearer guard turned and had time to register surprise and start a motion that didn't complete before Renko came through at his left, and the situation resolved itself in the compressed, deliberate way these situations did when the people conducting them had done similar things before, and the people on the receiving end had not expected to need their full capabilities tonight. Neither man was dead. Both men were going to wake up with significant headaches and a story that Damon suspected they would not be eager to tell their employer. He moved down the corridor. The third door on the right was padlocked from the outside. He cut it with bolt cutters he'd carried in his jacket. The same bolt cutters, he noted without humor, that he'd used on the mountain cabin approximately 6 hours ago, which suggested either a pattern or poor planning on his part. He pulled the door open. The woman inside came off the wall fast, the same way Elena had come off the floor on the mountain, and he registered in the fraction of a second before she connected that she had something in her hand, a fragment of something, metal, an edge she'd worked off a shelf bracket by the look of it, and she drove it toward his face with the focused desperation of someone who has been waiting for this moment for 2 days and is not going to waste it. He caught her wrist. She fought him. Hard. "Elena sent me," he said. She went still. Her name, from Elena's coded list, was not something he was going to use here. She was mid-40s, slight, with close-cropped hair that was matted on one side, and eyes that had been through something he could see the residue of. They had not been kind to her. There was a bruise around her left eye that was fully developed, 24 hours old at least, and her wrist, when he held it, had less resistance in it than it should, the grip of someone working through pain. "Elena, she said. Her voice was rough. "Is she alive? Moving? We need to go. They know things. They asked me things." She was already moving with him into the corridor with the urgency of someone who has been thinking about this moment for long enough that the motion is automatic. "About the routing documents, the account structures. I didn't tell them everything." "What did you tell them?" "Enough to buy time." She looked at him with the assessing eyes of someone who trusts nobody by default and is making a rapid calculation. "They know the Eastbridge primary account has been documented. They don't know about the secondary clearing mechanism." Damon filed that. "There's a secondary mechanism?" "An account structure in a different jurisdiction. I didn't give it to Elena yet. I was going to at the cabin meeting." She said it with the particular urgency of someone for whom this information has been the only leverage between them and a decision they feared. If that account structure gets published alongside the primary documentation, the entire network becomes financially traceable in real time. It closes every exit they have. "Can you document it now, from memory?" "I can write the account numbers and the holding entity names. I've had 2 days to do nothing but memorize them." She said it with a grim precision that told him she had spent the 2 days in that room doing exactly that, preparing for the moment when the information became her one useful thing. Renko was at the stairwell entrance, watching the corridor. He caught Damon's eye and gave a small nod. Clear. They went down. At the building's north exit, something had changed. Salas was not answering his earpiece, which was the kind of detail that arrived in Damon's awareness not as alarm, but as information that required immediate processing. He held up a fist, and Renko and the woman stopped. Silence. The corridor was dim, the loading dock door visible at the far end, 20 meters away. Then the door opened. Derek's soul came through it like a man who owns the building, which he did, walking with the measured, unhurried pace of someone who has decided that urgency would give too much away. He was older than Damon had expected, mid-60s, lean, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something more functional and considerably more dangerous. He was wearing a coat, and he had his hands visible, and he came forward and stopped at 15 meters and looked at the three of them with a mild expression that did not touch his eyes. "I figured north," he said. "You've always preferred north approaches. The industrial assessment you did on this district 3 years ago, your analyst noted it as a preference." "You had my analyst surveilled," Damon said. "I had everyone surveilled." He said it without apology, the way you state a condition of your professional life. His eyes moved to the woman beside Damon. "Dr. Chen, I'm sorry the accommodations were inadequate. The intent was temporary." The woman, Dr. Chen then, a name Damon registered and stored, said nothing. She had the stillness of someone conserving everything for what comes next. Sol looked back at Damon. "Where's Salas?" "Resting." A small acknowledgement. "You came with 3 people, and you're leaving with 1 person you didn't bring. That math doesn't improve your position." "Stay. I'm not here to negotiate a position," Damon said. "We're leaving." "You're welcome to try." Sol clasped his hands in front of him with the patience of a man who has been doing this longer than most people in the room have been alive. "I have 4 people on the south side and 2 more coming down from the roof now. The exit you came in through is covered. The loading dock door I came through is covered." He paused. "I want the secondary account information that Dr. Chen has been protecting. I want the drive your journalist is holding. And I want this situation to conclude in a way that doesn't require me to make additional decisions about additional people." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere above them, a sound moved through the ceiling. Footsteps, 2 sets, descending. Damon did not look at the ceiling. He kept his eyes on Sol and breathed and let the situation arrange itself in his mind the way these situations did when you had been in enough of them. The geometry of the space, the positions of bodies, the distance to the door, the time variables, and the physics. "The account information is already gone," Dr. Chen said. Sol looked at her. "I don't believe that." "I transmitted it from the room you were keeping me in," she said. "Last night, when your second guard fell asleep. My phone was in my jacket lining. You searched my bag." She said it with the flat satisfaction of someone delivering news they've been holding. "The transmission went through at 3 a.m. It's been in the same channel as the rest of Elena's documentation since then." Sol's face did not change, but something in his stillness changed quality, a different kind of still, the stillness of a man running rapid calculations and not showing which way they're landing. "You're lying," he said. "Possibly," she said. "Do you want to bet 8 years of operational security on it?" A long moment. Then Sol looked at Damon. "Your journalist changes the calculus. Whatever she publishes is already on its way," Damon said. "The filing happens in 40 minutes. The publication pathway is already active." He paused. "You called me last night to make an offer. That offer is no longer on the table. The only thing on the table now is how much of what follows you're present for." "That sounds like a threat." "It's an assessment." Sol studied him. The footsteps above them had stopped. The 2 people from the roof had reached whatever position Sol had directed them to, but were not visible yet, which meant they were holding and waiting for Sol's signal. Which meant Sol was still deciding. Damon watched him decide, and then Sol said, "There's something you don't know." And the mildness in his voice acquired something else, a careful quality, like someone uncovering a card they've been holding for the right moment. "About the investigation, about Caleb Mercer." Damon waited. "Mercer isn't the top of what you think he is," Sol said. "He's a mechanism. The same way I'm a mechanism. The beneficial ownership structure that your journalist documented, the names she has, those are real names. They're also the wrong names." He paused. "The people whose names appear in the Eastbridge documentation stepped back from direct ownership 7 years ago. The current beneficial structure is layered behind them. 2 more levels." A pause. "The person who gave the instruction for the V family situation, that name does not appear anywhere in what Dr. Chen transmitted or what's on your drive. Because that name has never appeared in any Eastbridge document. The person has been careful for 30 years, careful enough that even I don't know the full identification." The corridor was very quiet. Damon breathed through what Sol had just said. Let it arrive fully, the wrong names, 6 years of working toward a specific conclusion and arriving to find the conclusion had a floor underneath it. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because you're going to publish what you have regardless of what I do in this corridor. I can see that." Soul's voice was entirely flat, entirely without the manipulation of it. "And what you publish will destroy the visible structure. It will end Eastbridge. It will result in prosecutions. Mercer will cooperate for a reduced sentence and give up everyone he knows." He paused. But the person at the top walks away. Because they always have. Because they're not in any document. They're not in any communication. They're in a meeting that took place verbally, in a room, 20 years ago, and the only people present were that person and me. A very long silence. "You're offering to give me the name," Damon said. "I'm telling you the name exists and that I have it." Soul met his eyes. "What I want in exchange is simple. I walk out of this corridor. I'm not in the publication. I disappear. My operational history becomes part of whatever deal the prosecutor offers Mercer, attributed to unnamed sources. I am never named." "You orchestrated the death of my family," Damon said. His voice was entirely level. It required everything he had to keep it level. "I executed an instruction from a person whose name I'm offering you," Soul said. "That's the deal. The name and everything I know about the 30-year history of this operation, in exchange for walking out of this building." Damon looked at him for a long time. Dr. Chen, beside him, was completely still. Renko, at the stairwell, was watching Damon's face. "I need it in writing," Damon said. "Signed, right now, before you take a step toward that door." Soul reached into his coat pocket and produced a sealed envelope. "I had my attorney prepare it this morning," he said. "When I realized last night that containment was no longer viable." He held it out. "The name. A full accounting of the instruction chain for every operation in the past 6 years. Signed and notarized." A pause. "I've been carrying this for 20 years. I'm tired of it." Damon crossed the 15 meters between them and took the envelope. He opened it. He read the single page inside, which was dense with legal language and terminated in a name that meant something. Not a criminal name, not anyone who appeared in organized crime databases, but a name that he recognized from the public record, from news, from the specific category of person who had always been so far above any conceivable suspicion that the idea of connecting them to something like the Meridian chain would have seemed like paranoia. His face didn't change. He folded the page and put it in his jacket. "Go," he said to Soul. Soul nodded once. He walked to the loading dock door, opened it, and was gone. Renko let out a breath he'd been holding. Dr. Chen looked at Damon. "What's in the envelope?" "Something that changes everything," he said. "We need to get to Elena." "Yes." He called Elena from the car. She answered on the first ring. "Are you—" "Fine. Dr. Chen is with me. She has additional documentation." He paused. "I have something else. Something we didn't know about." He looked at the envelope in his hand. "Elena, the story is bigger than either of us thought." A silence on the line that lasted exactly as long as it took her to process the implication of that sentence. "How much bigger?" she said. "Soul gave me a name. The actual beneficial owner. The person who gave the instruction 6 years ago." He paused. "It's a public figure, not adjacent to public life, central to it. Someone with institutional authority and a 30-year history inside this network." Another silence. "Say the name," she said. He said it. The silence that followed was long enough that he said, "Elena." "I'm here," she said. She stopped. He heard her breathing. "That name appears in my investigation, not in the Eastbridge documentation. In a different context, a board affiliation. I saw it 3 months ago, and I documented it as incidental and moved past it." "It wasn't incidental." "No." Another breath. "If I go back through my files with that name as a focal point, how long do you need to get here?" 20 minutes. "I'll have something for you," she said. He put the phone down and looked at the city passing outside the window, the morning Caldwell traffic, the ordinary, unremarkable surface of a place that did not know what was moving through it, and felt something he had not felt in 6 years that was not exactly hope, and not exactly rage, but lived somewhere in the exact middle of both. They reached Perrin Street at 7:51 a.m. Elena had the laptop open when they came through the door, and her face was doing the thing that meant she had found something, the focused brightness of a person whose investigation has just reorganized itself around a new axis and confirmed itself rather than collapsed. Dr. Chen sat down across from her without preamble. "Secondary account structures," she said. "I'll give you everything." Elena looked at Damon. He held up the envelope. She reached for it, read the name on the page, and went very still. Then she looked up. "This person," she said. "3 months ago, I interviewed them for a different story, a profile. They gave me 2 hours in their office." Damon watched her face. "They asked me at the end," she said slowly, "what I was working on. I told them the trafficking investigation in general terms. I didn't give specifics." She paused. "They said they hoped I'd find what I was looking for." Her jaw tightened. "They knew exactly what I was looking for. They've known everything I've been doing, not just through Caleb, directly. Because Caleb was reporting to them." The room had gone very quiet. Dr. Chen looked between them. "Who are we talking about?" Damon said the name. Dr. Chen's expression did not shift in the way that shock shifts a face. It shifted in the way that confirmation does, slower, more complicated, the face of a person who had suspected something at the edge of possibility and is finding the edge was closer than they knew. "I have a financial record," she said, "from 8 years ago. A transaction I could never source to a person, only to an anonymous entity." She looked at Elena. "If the name matches the entity." "Show me," Elena said. Dr. Chen began to write. Outside on Perrin Street, the morning was fully established now, the city moving at the pace of a day that had no idea it was the last ordinary day a certain structure had left. The clock on the courthouse filing was 41 minutes away. The publication pathway was primed and waiting. And in the dry-cleaning, scented back room above an ordinary street, 2 women who had never met before this morning were building the last piece of the thing that was going to bring it all down. And Damon Varelli stood by the window and watched the street, and held a sealed envelope, and felt the name inside it pressing against his chest like something that had been owed to him for 6 years and was finally, unbearably, paid. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. "You have what you needed, so do we. Check your email, Varelli. The game changed 10 minutes ago and you don't know it yet." He opened his email. The message waiting there had no subject line and no signature and contained a single attachment. A photograph, taken recently, high resolution, showing a room he recognized from a few hours ago. The Perrin Street safe house kitchen, taken from inside. From a position that could only have been the window he was standing at right now, he turned from the window. The room was exactly as it had been. Elena at the laptop, Dr. Chen writing, Renko by the door. Nothing had changed. No one had entered, but the photograph had been taken from inside this room, which meant the location had been burned before they arrived, which meant every move they'd made in the past hour had been observed, which meant Soul's departure from the warehouse had not been a concession. It had been a repositioning. And the name in the envelope, the name Soul had handed him with the manner of a man surrendering, might have been exactly what it appeared to be. Or it might have been the last piece of misdirection in a very long game, designed to send them in a direction that used their final hours on a target that would never be reached while the real structure closed around them. Damon looked at Elena across the room and said her name, and she looked up and read his face and knew immediately that something had changed. "What?" she said. He held up the phone. She crossed the room and looked at the photograph, and he watched her face go through the same sequence his had: recognition, implication, the cold arrival of understanding. And then she looked at him with eyes that were entirely clear and entirely without the panic that the situation warranted, and said the only thing there was to say. "How much time do we have?" He looked at the clock. 38 minutes to the courthouse filing. 38 minutes, a compromised location, a name that might be a trap, and a woman beside him who had survived a blizzard and a locked cabin and a searched apartment, and the revelation that her editor had built her as an instrument, and who was still standing, still asking the right question, still moving forward. "Enough," he said. And he was not certain that was true. 38 minutes. Damon looked at the photograph on his phone one more time, then put it face down on the table. The window it had been taken from was directly behind him. He did not look at the window again. Looking at it would not change what the photograph meant, and he needed his mind on what came next rather than on the dimensions of how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. "We have to assume this location is being watched," he said. "Not just observed, actively staged. Sol let us take Dr. Chen. He handed us the envelope. He walked out." He said each sentence separately, giving each one its own weight. None of that was concession. It was placement. Elena was standing very still with her arms at her sides, not crossed, not braced. The posture of someone who has made a decision to be fully present in a moment and is not protecting themselves from it. "He wanted us in one location," she said, "with the drive, with Dr. Chen, with the secondary documentation, everything in one room." "Yes. So the filing is the target," Damon said. "Not us, not the evidence, the filing itself. If they can delay it, challenge it, intercept it at the clerk's office, the asset freeze doesn't happen, the financial restructuring goes through, and the evidence we have documents a network that no longer exists in the form we described." Elena looked at the clock on the laptop. 8:09 a.m. 51 minutes until the clerk's office opened. The filing was queued through her lawyer's system, set to transmit electronically at 9:01. Electronic filing could be challenged, could be pulled on procedural grounds if someone with the right institutional authority made a call to the right person in the next 50 minutes. The name in the envelope. "The name Sol gave us," Elena said. "You think it's false?" "I think it may be real and also a distraction. Both can be true." He paused. "If we spend the next 50 minutes building a case around that name, we're not watching the filing, we're not watching the financial channel, we're looking in the direction Sol pointed us. But if the name is real, it's still real tomorrow, after the filing goes through." He met her eyes. "The asset freeze is the priority. Everything else depends on the accounts being locked before the restructuring completes." Elena turned to Dr. Chen. "How long does the restructuring take?" "If they started when Sol left the warehouse," Dr. Chen calculated, "the primary Eastbridge accounts could be emptied in 3 hours. The secondary structures I documented take longer, 6 to 8 hours to fully dissolve the holding chain." She paused. "But if the freeze hits within the hour, even partial coverage of the secondary accounts creates enough of a traceable record that the restructuring becomes documentable in court." "The filing has to go through on time," Elena said. "Yes," Dr. Chen said. Damon's phone rang. Not a message this time. A call from Marcus Hale, and he handed it to Elena because it was her call to take. She answered. Marcus's voice came through with the tight, controlled urgency of a man who had been up all night and had arrived somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive. "Elena, the paper's legal department got a call 20 minutes ago. An attorney representing a man named Victor Crane is threatening an injunction against any publication from the Tribune related to the trafficking investigation. Prior restraint claim. They're filing in federal court at 8:30. "Victor Crane," Elena said. Damon watched her face. The name meant something to her. He could see it arriving, connecting to something she already knew. The particular expression of a piece that completes a shape you've been carrying partially for a long time. "Marcus, who is Victor Crane?" "Executive Director of the Caldwell Development Authority for the past 12 years. He's on 6 civic boards. He's been a behind-the-scenes infrastructure figure since before I came to the paper," she said. "Marcus, pull everything we have on the CDA's contractual relationships, specifically any contracts awarded to companies with Eastbridge in the ownership chain." She paused. "He's not a distraction. Sol gave us the real name. Crane uses the civic structure as the legitimacy layer." She looked at Damon. "That's why he's never appeared in the financial documentation. He operates through the development authority, public funds, public contracts, everything attributed to institutional decisions rather than personal direction. He controls the asset restructuring too," Dr. Chen said quietly. "The development authority has signature authority on 3 of the holding entities. I've seen the documents. I didn't know what I was looking at because the CDA connection seemed too visible to be suspicious." Elena said to Marcus, "The injunction attempt? Do we have grounds to fight it?" "Our legal team says yes, but it takes time. If they file at 8:30, a judge could issue a temporary hold on publication by 9, which means our publication window closes at the same moment the courthouse filing opens, Elena said. Crane is running 2 tracks simultaneously. Challenge the publication through the injunction, challenge the asset freeze through whatever contact he has at the clerk's office. She was moving as she talked, pulling up files on the laptop, typing fast. He needs both to fail for this to work. If either one gets through, the filing is the harder target, Damon said. An injunction against publication can be appealed and overturned. A court-ordered asset freeze, once executed, holds while the legal challenge plays out. The accounts stay frozen even if Crane's attorneys argue the freeze for months. He paused. Which means Crane's actual priority is the filing, not the injunction. The injunction is noise. It's meant to pull your legal team's attention. Elena stopped typing. She turned and looked at him with the expression of someone who has just watched a pattern resolve. He's done this before, she said. This exact playbook. The prior investigation, Thomas Wren, 4 years ago. Wren got close and the story was killed. How was it killed? Marcus's voice on the phone. Legal challenge, prior restraint claim, same mechanism. And Wren disappeared. Silence on the phone. Marcus, Elena said carefully, I need you to do something very specific in the next 40 minutes. The secondary account documentation from Dr. Chen, I'm sending it to you now. I need you to route it to the Federal Financial Crimes tip line directly, not through the paper's legal channel, your personal email to the federal address. She paused. If the injunction hits and our publication is delayed, the federal tip stands independently. They can't enjoin a federal investigation. Marcus paused. That exposes me personally. I know. A silence that lasted long enough for Damon to count his own heartbeat 3 times. Send it, Marcus said. She sent it. Then she looked at Damon and said, the photograph. The one from inside this room. Sol sent it to tell us we're contained, that wherever we go next, he has visibility. Yes. But he couldn't know what we just decided. He positioned us here to waste time chasing Victor Crane while the filing got neutralized. Instead, we're splitting the tracks. She paused. He doesn't know about the federal tip channel. Well, he will in 20 minutes, Damon said, when Marcus sends it. Then we have 20 minutes before the response shifts. She closed the laptop, picked up the drive, and looked at Dr. Chen. Is there anything on the secondary account documentation that requires you personally to be present for a federal investigation? My testimony, Dr. Chen said. The documents are evidence. My testimony is what contextualizes them. Without me explaining how I obtained them and what they represent, you need to be somewhere visible, Damon said, somewhere with cameras and witnesses and a public record of your presence. A federal building, Elena said. Yes. The same federal building where the filing goes through, Elena said slowly. At 9 a.m. Damon looked at her. You want to walk into the federal courthouse. I want to file the injunction response in person instead of electronically. I want to be standing in the clerk's office at 9 a.m. with Dr. Chen and the documentation and my lawyer in a federal building with federal security and cameras on every corridor. She met his eyes. Crane's people can watch the Perrin Street building all morning. They can run their injunction. They can make their calls to the clerk's office. She paused. But they cannot touch us inside a federal courthouse without committing a federal crime in front of federal cameras. The logic of it was clean and somewhat audacious, and he understood immediately why she had arrived there rather than somewhere else, because it was the move of someone who had correctly identified that their greatest vulnerability was physical exposure, and their greatest protection was the same institutional infrastructure that Crane had been using against them, turned around and used as a shield. Garrett, Damon said to Renko, can he get us to the federal courthouse in 20 minutes? If we leave now. Damon looked at Elena. She was already putting her jacket on. But Garrett drove like someone who understood that the nature of urgency is not speed, but precision. Moving through morning traffic with the particular focused efficiency of a man who knows which streets are clear at 8:15 a.m. and which ones are not, and has built his career on the difference. Damon sat in the front. Elena and Dr. Chen were in the back. Renko was in a separate vehicle following. Nobody talked. At 8:22 a.m., Elena's phone rang. Her lawyer, a woman named Diane Fossey, whose voice came through with the practiced steadiness of someone who had been in difficult legal situations before and had not been improved by them. The injunction was filed at 8:20, federal court downtown. Judge Hamlin's clerk received it. A pause. Victor Crane's attorneys are good. The filing has a temporary hold request attached. Hamlin could sign it without a hearing. Is Hamlin the judge Crane would want on this? Elena said. Hamlin is the judge Crane's attorneys specifically requested. Emergency petition allows them to specify a preference. Fossey paused. I don't know Hamlin's connection to Crane. I'm checking. Check fast and meet us at the federal courthouse at 8:50. We're filing the asset freeze in person, and we need you there. A pause. You're walking into the federal courthouse. Yes. That's either very smart or very... Yes, Elena said again. I'll see you at 8:50. She hung up. At 8:31, Damon received a message from the number he'd used for the judge contact. 2 words, hold granted, which meant the Eastbridge asset freeze filing had been intercepted at the clerk's level before the courthouse opened. Someone in the clerk's office, reached before 9 a.m., had agreed to flag the filing for judicial review before execution, which meant the clean channel he'd arranged the night before had been compromised, which meant Crane's reach into the judicial infrastructure was longer than Soul's envelope had suggested. He told Elena. She processed it in 4 seconds. The hold is on the electronic filing. We file in person at the clerk's window. It goes to a different docket than the electronic queue, harder to intercept. The hold order may apply to both. Judge Hamlin's hold order applies to the Tribune's publication and to any related filing by the Tribune's legal team, Fossey said, having been kept on the call. A filing by my office, as independent counsel on behalf of a private individual, Dr. Chen, as a whistleblower with direct financial documentation, is a separate docket. Hamlin's order doesn't cover it. Damon looked at Elena. Dr. Chen files, Elena said. Not the paper, not my lawyer, Dr. Chen's attorney. She looked at the woman beside her. Do you consent to that? Dr. Chen looked at her hands for a moment. They were steadier than they had any right to be, given what they had been through in the past 48 hours. Yes, she said. Yes, I consent. Fossey said, I can represent Dr. Chen for this purpose. She becomes my client effective now, separate from any Tribune representation. A pause. It's procedurally clean. It'll hold. The courthouse appeared ahead of them through the windshield, a wide federal building with the particular gray permanence of institutional architecture, its steps visible, the morning security line forming. Garrett pulled to the curb. 8:47, he said. 13 minutes. Gatsmato. The federal courthouse security line was 4 people deep and moved at the reliable pace of a process designed to be thorough rather than fast. Damon went through first, then Elena, then Dr. Chen with Fossey beside her, who had materialized at the bottom of the steps exactly when she said she would, a small, precise woman in a dark coat who shook hands with Dr. Chen and said 3 sentences in a low voice and then moved them through the line with the practiced authority of someone who did this regularly. Renko stayed outside. Damon did not look for Soul's surveillance and did not look for Crane's people. If they were there, and they were, certainly someone was watching the courthouse approach, looking for them would accomplish nothing except confirming their own location, which was already confirmed. The clerk's office was on the 2nd floor. They took the stairs. The corridor was wide and fluorescent and smelled of old paper and industrial cleaner, and at 8:53 a.m. it contained 3 other attorneys and a court officer and absolutely nobody who looked like a problem. Fossey went to the window with Dr. Chen and the documentation while Elena stood beside Damon 10 feet back and watched and did not speak. He could feel the quality of her stillness beside him. Not calm, the opposite of calm. The particular vibrating, contained intensity of a person running on 48 hours of fear and cold and revelation who is 4 minutes away from the thing they've been building toward. At 8:57 a.m., Victor Crane walked into the corridor. He was not what Damon had constructed from the name. He was 70, slight, with white hair precisely kept in a dark suit and the unhurried, composed bearing of a man who had spent 60 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered and had learned to wear it invisibly. He was accompanied by 2 attorneys and a man in a gray coat who was not an attorney. He stopped in the corridor and looked at Elena. She looked at him. 40 feet of federal corridor between them, fluorescent light, the distant sound of the clerk's window transaction proceeding behind the sound of everything else. Crane said, to the corridor generally, in the voice of a man who is accustomed to being heard without raising it, "Miss Voss, I've been following your work for some time." Elena said nothing. "You're very good," Crane said. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment from a professional evaluating another professional's technique. "Mercer told me you were the best he'd worked with. I believe he was correct." He took one step forward, unhurried. "It's unfortunate that good work sometimes reaches conclusions that are structurally flawed. The Eastbridge documentation has significant chain of custody issues that will become apparent when it's examined by—" "Mr. Crane," Elena said. He stopped. "I know that you ordered the deaths of Damon Varelli's mother and sister 6 years ago," she said. "I know that Thomas Wren found Eastbridge 4 years ago and that you had him removed from the investigation, and I know what removed means in your operational vocabulary. I know that you've been the beneficial controller of the Meridian chain for 30 years through the Development Authority's contract network, and I know that the secondary account documentation that Dr. Chen's filing right now includes your signature authority on 3 holding entities." She paused. "The federal financial crimes tip was submitted by Marcus Hale at 8:19 a.m. from his personal email. The digital timestamp is federal record. The evidence is in 5 separate locations that your attorneys cannot reach without committing additional felonies." She looked at him steadily. "The chain of custody is intact." Crane looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Damon. The 2 men looked at each other across 40 feet of corridor with the particular quality of recognition between people who have been moving toward each other for a long time without knowing it. Damon, through grief, an operational pursuit, and a February 6 years ago that had reshaped everything. Crane through 30 years of institutional insulation and a confidence that his architecture was impenetrable. "You drove up a mountain in a blizzard," Crane said to Damon, with the mildly curious tone of someone examining an outcome they hadn't modeled. "For a woman you'd never met." "Yes," Damon said, "because of a wrong number." "Yes." Crane seemed to genuinely consider this for a moment. Then he said, "Derek Soule told me you were emotional. I told him he was wrong, that you were a professional." A pause. "I was wrong." "Yes," Damon said, "you were." Behind them, at the clerk's window, Fossey said something in a low professional voice, and the clerk responded, and there was the sound of a document being accepted, stamped, entered into the system. Crane heard it. His attorneys heard it. The man in the gray coat took one step, and Damon moved, and Renko came through the stairwell door. He had come up from a different stairwell, positioned before any of them reached this floor. And the man in the gray coat stopped and measured the distance and the geometry and made the calculation that professionals make when they realize the room has shifted. He stepped back. One of Crane's attorneys put a hand on Crane's arm. Crane looked at the hand. He looked at the attorney. He looked at the clerk's window where the transaction had been completed and where Dr. Chen was signing a document with Fossey standing at her shoulder. Then Victor Crane, executive director of the Caldwell Development Authority, the man whose name appeared in no criminal database, whose civic biography contained no visible gap or question, who had run a trafficking network through 30 years of institutional respectability and had ordered the deaths of at least 14 people with the same flat administrative efficiency with which he had signed development contracts, stood in a federal corridor and understood that the architecture was done. He said nothing. His attorneys began speaking procedural language, challenge language, the vocabulary of people whose job is to insert delay between a fact and its consequences. And Damon stopped listening to them because he was looking at Elena, who had turned from Crane and was walking to the clerk's window with the drive in her hand and her lawyer's number on her phone's screen. And her face was carrying something that was not triumph and not relief, but was older and more complicated than either, the expression of a person who has arrived somewhere they needed to reach and is finding that arrival feels different from how they imagined it would. She looked back at him once, across the corridor. He nodded. She turned back to the window. Ochad. Victor Crane was taken into federal custody at 11:40 a.m., 4 hours after the filing completed. He did not resist. He walked out of his Development Authority office between two federal agents with the same composed bearing he had brought to the courthouse corridor, the same invisible confidence, and it was only in a photograph taken by a Tribune staff photographer who happened to be positioned on the building steps, tipped by Marcus Hale, who had been tipped by Elena, who had arranged it before they left Perrin Street, that you could see the single detail that composed expressions don't entirely hide, which was that his hands, clasped in front of him, were held together more tightly than casual composure requires. Caleb Mercer surrendered to federal authorities at 2 p.m. He called his attorney first, which was the decision of a man who had been in enough rooms to understand exactly how this played out. His cooperation agreement, signed by 6 p.m., produced 12 additional names from the Meridian chain's corporate layer, 2 of whom had direct ties to the Municipal Police Department's security consulting firm. An internal affairs investigation opened by the following morning. Derek's soul was not found in Caldwell. He was not found in the state. A federal warrant for his arrest was issued based on documentation from Elena's files and from the soul-signed envelope, which had turned out to be real, the name correct, the accounting accurate, the signature verified by 2 separate forensic analysis firms. Whether Soul had genuinely been done with it, as he had said in the warehouse corridor, or whether he had made a calculation about survivability and decided that giving up Crane was the better bet than being caught protecting him, Damon would never know with certainty. He suspected both were true. He suspected Soul was the kind of man for whom genuine exhaustion and careful self-interest could coexist in the same decision without contradiction. Thomas Wren was found alive in a small town in western Vermont, living under a different name, having rebuilt a quiet life after what he described in a later interview as the event that convinced him the world he had been working in was not survivable. He had not told anyone where he was. He came forward himself when Elena's publication broke, in a phone call to Fosse's office that lasted 4 hours. His testimony added 3 years to the historical record of Crane's operation. The 4 victims who had given testimony to Elena, the 3 confirmed safe, the 4th who had been Dr. Chen, were each contacted by federal victim advocates within 48 hours of the filing. 2 of them agreed to testify publicly. The other 2 did not, and their names remained coded in the investigation's public record, which Elena had specified in the publication terms. She had specified a lot of things. She had spent the afternoon of the courthouse filing and the 3 days following it in a borrowed office, not the Tribune's, not yet, writing the piece that would eventually run as a 23,000-word investigation in a national magazine whose editor had been a colleague from Elena's early career and who had published the full account without cuts. The piece named Crane, Mercer, the corporate structure, the victim pattern, the 30-year history. It named Thomas Wren and the previous investigation's suppression. It named the 4 operational deaths that could be attributed to Crane's directive, with the evidence chain for each. It did not name Damon Varelli. She had made that decision without asking him. He found out when the piece published, reading it on his phone in an empty room in a building he was in the process of leaving behind, and the omission was so deliberate and so precisely accomplished, working around the shape of him without erasing the actions he had taken, that it would have required a reader who already knew to identify the place where he existed in the story. He read it twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked out the window at the city he had operated in for 20 years and tried to understand what he felt about the version of himself that existed in those 23,000 words. Present without a name, necessary without being central, a figure the story moved around rather than through. He thought it was probably the most honest rendering of him he had encountered. 2. 6 weeks after the courthouse filing, Elena's lawyer called her to say that the Eastbridge asset freeze had resulted in the recovery of accounts sufficient to establish a victim restitution fund significant enough to matter. The number was not everything, and it was not enough, and it was more than had ever previously been recovered in a case of this type in the state's legal history. Elena was in her apartment when she took the call. The lock had been replaced. She had replaced it herself, the morning after the filing, with a deadbolt she bought at a hardware store and installed with a YouTube tutorial and a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer. And the fact that she had done it herself rather than calling a locksmith was not something she had examined for what it meant. She stood at her kitchen window after the call and looked at the city in the particular gray light of a February afternoon. A different February from the one that had taken the Virelli family, but February nonetheless, with its specific quality of cold and endurance, and understood that she was different from who she had been before the mountain and could not yet see exactly how. She had gone back to the Tribune. Caleb Mercer's position had been dissolved and an interim editor appointed, and the paper's publisher had asked her with the particular careful deference of an institution attempting to rehabilitate its relationship with someone it had structurally failed, whether she would continue her investigations column under the new editorial structure. She had said she would think about it. She was still thinking about it. Marcus Hale had been promoted to the interim editorship. He had called her the morning after the promotion was announced and said, "I want you to know I would have told you about Caleb sooner if I'd known sooner." And she had said, "I know." And they had not talked about it further because they had known each other for 3 years, and the shorthand between them was sufficient. She thought about Thomas Wren sometimes, the version of this story that had ended differently, the version in which she had gone to the mountain and the cabin door had held, and no one had come, and the phone had died, and the blizzard had done what blizzards do. She thought about it without the kind of extended dwelling that makes an imagined alternative into a weight. She had survived. The story had survived. The particular combination of accidents that had made that true. A mistyped digit, a man who answered a message from a stranger, a door that had been broken down twice in the same night in different mountains, was too unlikely to feel like anything other than what it was. She had not seen Damon Virelli since the day after the courthouse filing. He had come to Perrin Street that evening to collect what was left there, and she had been there still, finishing the first draft of the piece. And they had sat for an hour in the kitchen with coffee and talked about what had happened in the way that people sometimes can when they have been through something together that neither of them had language for yet. He had told her what the envelope's name had meant to him, not in detail, not in the way a man processes grief for public view, but in the way a person tells the truth to someone who has earned it. Short sentences, long pauses between them. She had listened. He had said, at some point near the end of the hour, that he was going to step back from his organization. Not immediately, not cleanly. 20 years of structure did not dissolve in a week, but directionally. That the thing he had built was built on a premise that had been challenged by the past 48 hours, and he did not know yet what the premise would be replaced with, but he understood that the current version of it was something he was finished with. She had said, "What does stepping back look like?" He had said, "Quieter." She had nodded, because she understood that quieter was not nothing, and that for some people it was the most significant directional change available. She had asked him, near the end, why he had answered the message, not the practical explanation, the unknown number, the impulse, the drive north. She meant underneath that. She meant what, at 11:47 p.m. on a frozen night, had made Damon Virelli, who ran a criminal organization on the principle that emotional response was a liability, put down a meeting with a man who had stolen from him and drive 60 miles into a blizzard for a stranger. He had thought about it for long enough that she'd wondered if he was going to answer at all. Then he said, "I've been in rooms where the door was locked from the outside, not literally, but the feeling, knowing you can't leave, knowing someone made that choice for you." He paused. "I don't think I can walk past that. Whatever else I am." She had written it down later in a notebook that was separate from her investigation files, in the section she kept for things that were not quite sentences yet and not quite understanding but were somewhere between the two. She looked at it now, in the gray February light of her kitchen. Whatever else I am. She was going to write something else eventually, not the investigation, something that had no name yet but had been forming at the edge of her thinking since the mountain, since the corridor, since the hour in the kitchen on Perrin Street. Something about the way a story begins before you can see it, about wrong numbers and locked doors, and the particular geometry of two people moving through the same city for years without finding each other until a blizzard made the city small enough. She was not ready to write it yet. She was close. Her phone buzzed, a message from a number she had saved under a first name only. The restitution fund news. I read it. Good work. She looked at it for a moment. Outside the window, the February light was doing what February light does in the late afternoon, losing its argument with the dark. The city shifting into the version of itself that runs on lamplight and assumption. She typed back, "Where are you?" A pause. Longer than the question required. She understood the pause was not hesitation, but something more considered. The pause of a man deciding what honesty looks like in a new context. "Quieter," he wrote. She looked at the word for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on the counter and poured herself a glass of water and drank it standing at the window, looking at the city that had been the same city all along, and was now, in some way she couldn't entirely specify, different from the one she had known before a blizzard rearranged everything. She thought about the drive, which was in her desk drawer now, backed up in 6 locations. The original, a small inert object that had seemed enormous for a brief period, and was now just a thing. She thought about Caleb Mercer's face in the federal corridor, which she had not let herself process during the days when processing it would have been a liability. She processed it now, here, standing in her kitchen, and found it did not produce what she expected. Not anger, not vindication, something closer to grief, which surprised her and then, on reflection, didn't. Grief for the version of the investigation she had believed she was conducting, for the mentor she had thought she had, for the 8 months of trust that had been built on a foundation that was planning her death. She processed it and let it pass and washed the glass and set it on the counter. The piece had run. The accounts were frozen. Crane was in federal custody. The network was being dismantled by people whose institutional authority was better suited to dismantling it than Damon's methods or her own. The Victim Restitution Fund existed. Thomas Wren had come forward from Vermont. Source C, Dr. Chen, was alive and had testified and would testify again at trial. She had done what she had gone to the mountain to do. She picked the phone back up and looked at his message again. Quieter. Thought about a man who had driven 60 miles in a blizzard for a wrong number and broken down 2 doors in one night. One on a mountain he had driven to in the dark, and one 6 years ago that had been closed in him when his family was taken and that he had been carrying the weight of ever since. She typed, "Quieter sounds right. Come find me when it's loud enough." She sent it before she could apply the kind of editorial judgment she applied to everything else she wrote, which was probably how it was meant to be sent. She put the phone in her pocket and went to her desk and opened her notebook to the section that had no name yet and picked up her pen. Outside, the city settled into the evening that followed every storm. The particular quiet of a place that has been through something and doesn't yet know what it means and is still here anyway, still lit, still moving, the sound of it coming through the window like a pulse that she had stopped noticing only when she was on a mountain in a blizzard and could no longer hear it. She could hear it now. She began to write.